Another great interview to have here on the show tonight, our friend Dan Clayton, who is a contributor for Salt City Hoops, follows the Utah Jazz very closely, and joins us now. And Dan, thanks for spending some time with us. I know tonight we've got a Jazz game going on that you're going to be paying very close attention to, but appreciate you squeezing us in for a little bit.
Of course, it's always fun to talk to my pals up there in beautiful Cache Valley.
This Jazz team, I know a lot of Jazz fans are hopping up and down. They're finding the panic button and they're hitting it quite hard. I mean, this is a team that's lost 6 of their last 8, and they really haven't been very competitive in those 6 losses. Right. Should we be panicked, or is this just, hey, teams have slumps, they go through this, the Jazz have gone through this before, and they've still been okay?
So I still think the Jazz are a good team that's having a bad stretch, but we're definitely past the point where we can sugarcoat it and pretend that they're not playing really poorly right now. To your point, it's not just that they're 2-6 in the last 8. It's the fact that, I think people expected them to struggle going into Milwaukee, going into Toronto, going into Indiana, some of the tough places they played on that road trip there towards the end of November, going into early December. But it's the fact that now they're coming home, they're facing lottery teams like, Monday night they faced Oklahoma City, who is a sub-500 team who was down 2 starters and playing on a back-to-back. And even then, the Jazz looked like the team that was stuck in mud and really struggled to keep pace with a team that's not going to make the playoffs this year. So I think that's the stuff that is frustrating for people. The Jazz have not beat a team that currently has a winning record since November 12th. So we're talking about a month now.
Wow.
That the Jazz haven't beat anybody that you can really hang your hat and say, wow, that's a game that a contender should win.
So when looking at what's going on here, some of the comments after the Oklahoma City game were that, teams are being more physical against us than we're used to. We're not handling that well. There was a stretch there whenever Rudy Gobert would go to the bench, teams would flip a switch and attack the basket, and the Jazz couldn't stop them. But this team is, by and large, healthy. I mean, Mike Conley notwithstanding. So some of the things that seem to be problematic for the Jazz haven't historically been problematic for the Jazz. Did they just miss Derek Favors and Jay Crowder or guys like that more than we realize?
I mean, there's something to be said for what those guys brought in some of the intangible departments. I think, look, what Bojan Bogdanovic is adding to the Jazz right now from an offensive standpoint, he's struggling. He's in a slump. But, I mean, what he adds in general to the Utah Jazz, I think outweighs some of what you lose with a Jay Crowder type, and even some of what you lose with Favors. I mean, Favors was unique because he was the Jazz's starting forward, but he was also, the guy gobbling up pretty much all of those backup center minutes behind Rudy Gobert. So a little different case there. But I guess my broader point here is just that, the Jazz have a talented roster. They lost some talented guys, but they did that last offseason so that they could add guys like Mike Conley, guys like Bojan Bogdanovic. I don't know that they can point to, oh, Crowder's gone, oh, Favors is gone, oh, Rubio's gone as an excuse. The whole point of their off-season priorities was to go out and upgrade those rotation spots, and I think they did. Now, it cost them a little bit of depth on the back end of the rotation, and that's part of the issue that we're seeing now, is that the Jazz are having to throw more minutes out of necessity to guys who probably, if we're honest about it, are like fringe rotation quality at best, right? Like Emmanuel Mudiay has never in his NBA career played winning basketball over a long period of time, and now he's Utah's like 9th man, right? George Niang, probably a fringe rotation guy, meaning, some nights he's going to look helpful, some nights he's not. Now he's the Jazz's 10th man and seeing semi-meaningful minutes. So I think that's part of the issue, is that the Jazz did have to downgrade, call it spots 7 through 15, in order to upgrade spots 1 through 6 on their roster to the degree that they did. And I think ultimately they'll figure that out. But right now there is definitely a big letdown as soon as they really go to their bench at all, or really go past Joe Ingles on their bench, because the Jazz have a very solid front 6. And then they have a bunch of guys who are either struggling or who really have never been all that great in the NBA to begin with.
This is also, Rasha, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that Bojan Bogdanovic was called on to pretty much carry the Pacers for a good chunk of the season a year ago. Mike Conley had to carry the Grizzlies for a good chunk of the season a year ago. Even to some degree, Mudiay was the offensive weapon that the Knicks had. Now you've cobbled them all together, and you're asking them to play team ball. Is this point of the season guys starting to settle back into old habits? Could that be part of what's going on?
I don't think so with the starting group or with that core six group. I do think that when the bench comes in, there's a little bit of my turn, your turn offense being played. You're right. Conley and Bogey really had central roles on their teams last year, but they're high IQ basketball players. They're guys who wanted to be in this situation because they wanted to be surrounded by other threats. They wanted to play with a spread floor and a balanced attack. But then, what happened is you go to the bench and you have some players who maybe don't have the same ability to really make the defense react in terms of playing system ball. So what they do instead is they play a little bit of head down isolation basketball. And, I think that's what the Jazz have seen a lot of out of Emmanuel Mudiay. And for the first 7 or 8 games of the season, he was doing well. And so everybody was celebrating that. Well, for the last month, it really hasn't gone that well for the Jazz. And the problem when you have a player like that, especially at point guard, is that, again, if he's making those shots, it's great. If he's missing them, then now nobody else is getting involved in your offense. And suddenly you have guys like Joe Ingles, who are really talented basketball players, who are slumping because they're just not seeing the ball in the spots and in the situations where they're used to seeing the ball. So I think that bench rotation is going to be something that Quinn Snyder is going to have to continue to solve and figure out how the Jazz can continue to look like the Jazz, even when some of those main six guys need to take a rest, and you're relying for a few minutes on Mudiay and on Jeff Green and Ed Davis and Niang and Dante Exum.
So I wanted to talk about Exum with the way you're describing Mudiay, how maybe he is not really helping the team so much in the team ball. Is the gap between him and Exum then so great that Quinn Snyder can't say, Mudiay, you got to sit down. You're not doing it right. Exum's got to get in there and do what we need him to do. This seems like we've given a lot of time and patience for Exum, but he's still getting beat out on minutes played by a pretty wide margin.
I'll be honest with you, Eric. This is one that continues to puzzle me. I know Exum has looked very rusty. He's only played 11 games, I think, since returning from this latest round of injury, this time a patellar tendon in his knee, a different knee from the previous ACL surgery. But, he's working his way back to rhythm, and that's obvious. He does not look great when he puts the ball on the floor and tries to finish himself. But for me, this issue of why are the Jazz continuing to give Emmanuel Mudiay such a long leash when they have a player like Exum who, even when he's rusty, just does some things naturally that would help this second unit, right? Like, Exum is a player who, because of his speed with the ball, he can cause the defense to react to him. And that's something that the second unit isn't getting enough of. And he's also, obviously, we've all known since his rookie season, Exum is also a superior on-ball defender, or at least can be a superior on-ball defender when he's playing well. So for me, the answer to that question, Eric, I'm way past the point where I would be throwing more of those minutes Exum's way as opposed to Mudiay, who like I say, I think can be useful as a situational scorer, as a guy who can come in and kind of bulldog his way to a couple buckets sometimes when you need them. But in terms of someone to actually run some pick and roll and guard the other team, another ingredient in Monday's loss that I don't think has been discussed enough is how Dennis Schroeder of OKC just went off for about a 4-minute period in the third quarter of that game while OKC was pulling away with a 19-4 run. Schroeder had 12 of those 19 points, and it was pretty much all while Emmanuel Mudiay was primarily guarding him, and also while they were forcing switches to get George Niang switched out onto him. So basically, OKC found a weakness in the Jazz's defensive armor, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, I just don't know how they can continue to let those things happen, to watch those things happen, and not say to themselves, hey, maybe we should give this guy a try who, is struggling right now. Exum is struggling. There's no way around that. But he's someone who historically has been able to frustrate multiple league MVPs with his defensive prowess on the perimeter. Why not give that guy a shot at getting a little bit of that feel for the game back? And instead, he's someone who literally has stepped on the court in the second half of games twice in the last 10 Jazz games outside of garbage time. They're just not using him in the second halves of games at all. And I continue to just find that weird, especially given the fact that some of his strengths seem naturally to match up with what the second unit needs more of. Sorry, that was a long answer. But
no, it was great.
But that's one that's been, almost literally keeping me up at night. I don't know why we haven't seen the minute allocation go that direction. Moutier has been having a rough few weeks here.
Again, we're talking to Dan Clayton with Salt City Hoops. And before I let you go, do you think the Jazz are players in the early trade market to try to shift things up a little bit with their bench?
I don't think they'll be a big player, no, just because they don't really have the salaries and assets to piece together for a trade. They're obviously not going to trade Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell. They're not going to trade guys they just got in Bogey and Conley. So really, their tradable assets are pretty limited. They also traded some picks out to bring Conley last offseason, so now they're restricted in terms of there are rules in the NBA about not trading away first-rounders in consecutive years. So that really limits them in terms of their ability to use draft assets to bring players back. Because of all of that, I think if they make a trade, it'll be something a lot more minor, like, maybe trading their 8th man for another team's 11th man or something crazy like that. What I do think that they will try to do, I think that they intentionally sign some of these end-of-bench guys to contracts with partial guarantees because they do expect to be players, or at least to want to be players in the buyout market when some veterans maybe get shaken loose, around the middle of the season.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, Dan, yeah. I'm glad we could work you into the show tonight, and appreciate your time. I know you got a Jazz game you're going to be following tonight, and appreciate you carving out a little bit of time for us tonight.
Yeah, of course.